Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's chilling story. Before we begin, I want to send a very happy belated birthday shout out to Miss Liberty 1776. I hope your day was filled with love, laughter, and all the joy you deserve. But for now, it's time to settle in, turn off the lights, and let the darkness take control, as we dive into a tale that will make you think twice about your safety. Let me take you back to 2016, a year that would change my life forever. My daughter, who was only 3 at the time, and I were at our usual park. We had visited this park many times before on weekends, after school, whenever the weather was nice. It was always our escape, a peaceful place where I could watch her play, run around, and just be a kid. But that day, everything felt different. It was a warm, sunny Saturday, and the park was unusually packed with children and parents. It was a beautiful day, and everyone seemed to be out, enjoying the sunshine. Normally, I would run around with her, playing catch or pushing her on the swings, but that day, I felt a strange sense of unease. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though something was off. I decided to take a short break, just a moment for myself. A chance to catch my breath, to sit back and watch her play. But I knew I couldn't relax. Even though I was sitting down, my eyes never left her. My gaze stayed locked on her every move. I was hyper-aware of everything, every child around her, every sound in the park. Nothing escaped my attention. At just 21 years old, I was young, petite, and often mistaken for a teenager rather than a mother. My small frame and youthful appearance made it easy for people to misjudge me, but my protective instincts were anything but naive. I had learned to be hypervigilant over the years, especially since my daughter's father had never been involved in our lives. I was everything to her: her mother, her protector, her entire world. She had never known him. I had made sure of that. I didn't bring men around her, she wasn't used to being around men at all. In fact, men with facial hair scared her, and I didn't blame her for that. I understood her fear. There were too many stories, too many dangers in this world for me to ignore. She was my responsibility, and I would protect her with my life. What happened next, though, is something I'll never forget. It felt like a scene from a nightmare, so vivid and surreal, that it still haunts me to this day. I had been sitting on the park bench, watching her with unwavering attention, when she turned toward the swings. Her golden hair caught the sunlight as she spun around, her eyes lighting up as she waved at me, her smile as bright as ever. I waved back, reassured by her joy, by the innocence of the moment. It was the most beautiful thing to see, her happiness shining through. And then, just like that, everything changed. I saw him. A man, casually strolling across the park. At first, he seemed harmless, just another person in the crowd, but something about him felt wrong. He was a man of average build, brown skin, a full beard that looked out of place in the bright sunlight. His movements were too smooth, too practiced, like he belonged there. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Before I could even process what was happening, he was too close. He walked right up to my daughter, who had turned her attention to the swings just a few steps ahead of her. He grabbed her hand. It didn't register immediately. I watched, frozen for a split second, as he gently took her hand and began walking away, toward the parking lot. My heart stopped. I jumped up, a surge of adrenaline flooding my system. My legs moved before I could think, pumping with raw panic and fear. I bolted after them, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. I caught up to him within seconds, grabbing my daughter's hand with both of mine, yanking her away from him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice trembled, but I stood my ground. The man froze, his wide eyes locking with mine in shock. His hand dropped from my daughter's, and he began fumbling over his words. "Oh, is this your daughter?" he stammered. "She came up to me. She said she was scared. I couldn't find her parents." The lie was so transparent, so poorly constructed that I felt a sickening shiver run down my spine. My daughter's eyes were wide with terror, and she clutched onto me as if her life depended on it. I knew instantly that he was lying. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted. As if on cue, I saw another figure out of the corner of my eye, a man, clean-shaven, sprinting across the park in the opposite direction. He hopped into a different car, and just like that, they were gone. Two men, two different stories, and a child who could have vanished forever if I hadn't been paying attention. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, dialing the police. The panic in my voice was palpable, but I forced myself to stay calm as I explained the situation. The officer's response still chills me to this day. "This is a common technique used in child trafficking," he said. Two people, usually from different races or genders, work together to abduct a child. One grabs the child, and if they're stopped or reported, the description goes out. By the time the police are looking for a man with a beard, the child has already been switched with the second person, who's usually waiting in a different car. The first man is a decoy, a ghost. The second man takes the child, and the police chase shadows, while the real abductor disappears. It was too close. Far too close. If I had looked away for even a second, if I had been distracted by a text, a conversation, anything that took my focus off my daughter, she could have been gone. I wouldn't have even known. I wouldn't have been fast enough to stop them. That moment is a constant reminder to me, never let your guard down. Never assume you're safe, not even for a second. 1 second. That's all it takes for your world to change forever. So, my friends, let this story be a reminder to you all. Always be vigilant, always be aware. Because sometimes, just when you think everything is fine, everything can go wrong. Stay safe, and thank you for listening. I was sitting on the park bench, the warm sun casting a pleasant glow over everything, watching my daughter play. The park was lively, filled with the sound of children laughing and the chatter of parents, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. My daughter, blissfully unaware of anything beyond her own world of play, was running toward the swings, her golden hair flowing behind her as she dashed across the grass. Everything felt perfectly normal. That is, until I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think much of it at first, my attention split between watching her and observing the crowd. But then I saw him again, a man, standing just a little too still among the hustle and bustle of the park. He was tall, brown-skinned, with a thick beard, and there was something about his presence that felt wrong, off. He didn't fit in with the rest of the people around. Everyone else was absorbed in their own families, lost in the moment of enjoying a Saturday afternoon, but he was focused, his gaze fixed on my daughter. I couldn't explain it, but the moment I saw him, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. His posture was too stiff, his movements too smooth, almost predatory. He didn't look like a father, a grandfather, or even another passerby. It was the way he moved that was unnerving, fluid, almost practiced, as though he knew exactly what he was doing and where he was going. The smile he wore was hollow, lacking the warmth of someone who simply wanted to enjoy the day. There was an edge to his expression, an intensity I couldn't ignore. And that's when it hit me, he was too close. My daughter was only a few steps away, her attention fixed on the swing set in front of her, unaware of the danger approaching. She smiled at me, her face glowing with joy, and then turned away to walk toward the swing. Her golden hair shimmered in the sunlight as she spun around. "I'm right here, baby," I whispered to myself, trying to keep the rising panic at bay. "I'll be watching." But that's when I saw it, the moment that would haunt me forever. The man, seemingly out of nowhere, approached her. Without hesitation, he reached out and grabbed her tiny hand. My heart skipped a beat, a cold rush of fear flooding my veins. He didn't kneel down and ask if she was lost. He didn't even try to comfort her, to ease her fears. No. He just took her hand and began walking, heading straight toward the parking lot, as though she were just another lost child. Everything moved in slow motion. My mind scrambled to make sense of what was happening, but it was already too late. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was on my feet, sprinting after them. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of blood rushing in my ears drowning out the noise of the park. Each step felt like an eternity as I ran toward them, my body moving on pure instinct. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice trembling with panic. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" In an instant, the man froze, his grip on my daughter's hand still tight. His eyes widened, his expression shifting from confusion to fear, as though he hadn't expected to be stopped. He stammered, fumbling for an explanation, his words coming out in a jumbled mess. "Oh, is this your daughter?" he said, as if he were the victim. "She came up to me. She said she was scared. I couldn't find her parents." I didn't buy it for a second. The lie was too obvious, too flimsy. My daughter clung to me like her life depended on it, burying her face in my leg as she sobbed in terror. I knew something was wrong. Then, before I could react, he pulled his hand away and bolted, running at a speed I couldn't have anticipated. But it wasn't just him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw another figure, a clean-shaven white man darting across the park, disappearing into a different section. He rushed toward a car parked far from the first man, as though they had rehearsed their escape. Two men, two different cars, and two completely different stories. Something didn't add up. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the police, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. As I spoke to the officer, I struggled to keep the panic from consuming me. I reported the incident, my voice shaky but determined. The officer on the other end of the line explained something that made my stomach turn. "This is a common child trafficking tactic," he said. "Two people, usually from different races or genders, work together to abduct a child. One grabs the child, and if they're caught or noticed, the description goes out. By the time the police are searching for a man with a beard, the second person has already switched out the child with another. They've made the swap, and the real abductor disappears into the crowd. The man I had stopped was just the decoy. A ghost. The second man, the one I hadn't noticed, the one who had disappeared, was the real kidnapper. The police chase the first man, the decoy, while the child is quietly taken by the second man. It was too close. Far too close. If I had looked away for even a second, if I had been distracted, if I had been texting, reading, or even just blinking, my daughter would be gone. I wouldn't have known what had happened. I wouldn't have been fast enough to stop him. That thought still haunts me, and it's something I can't shake. I constantly replay that moment in my mind, imagining what might have happened if I hadn't been watching her with such intensity. What if I hadn't been there? What if I hadn't been paying attention to every movement, every stranger around us? I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, of not being able to protect her. But that day, I had been fortunate. I had been aware. And it had made all the difference. The officer's words still echo in my mind: never let your guard down. Never assume you're safe, not even for a second. Because that 1 second could change everything. So, my friends, let this be a lesson. Always stay vigilant, always watch the ones you love. Because in this world, there are dangers that we can't even begin to comprehend. And sometimes, just sometimes, a mother's watchful eye is the only thing standing between a child and something far darker. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shut my mind off. I replayed every moment of the terrifying encounter over and over. The image of my daughter, so innocently walking toward the swing set, and then the man grabbing her hand, still haunted me. I could see his face clearly in my mind, that cold, calculated look he had when he turned toward the parking lot. The sharp panic in my chest when I first realized what was happening. The sheer speed with which my heart had raced, pushing me to act before I even knew what I was doing. It had all happened so fast. The moment of realization, the sprint, the confrontation, and then the sudden departure of the man, it all felt like a blur, a chaotic whirlwind of emotions. I kept wondering, what if I hadn't been paying attention? What if I had looked away, even for a split second? What if I had been caught up in something trivial, like checking my phone or chatting with someone else? It was a thought that sent chills down my spine, and the fear of what could have happened overwhelmed me. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. The world had changed in an instant, and I realized just how fragile our sense of security really is. The park, once a safe, familiar place where I could let my guard down, no longer felt safe. The community around me, the parents, the children, they were no longer just faces in the crowd, they were potential threats, each one a stranger in their own right, and I could never be too sure. As I lay there in the dark, my daughter sleeping soundly beside me, I couldn't help but think about how different things could have been. What if I hadn't caught up to them in time? What if the man had been faster, or if I had hesitated for just a second longer? The thought made my stomach turn. I was certain that if I hadn't acted so quickly, I wouldn't have seen her again. But it wasn't just the close call that shook me. It was the unsettling realization that something far darker was at play. The way the man had acted, his haste, his calm demeanor, and the way he had moved told me that he wasn't new to this. This wasn't his first time. There was a chilling familiarity in the way he interacted with my daughter, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He wasn't trying to reassure her or help her find her parents. No, he just grabbed her hand and started walking, as though she were nothing more than a possession. And then there was the second man. The clean-shaven man, who had slipped away unnoticed, blending into the crowd. He had been fast, moving swiftly, but there was something about the way he ran that told me he wasn't just an innocent bystander. He wasn't just another parent hurrying to leave the park. He knew exactly where he was going, and it was away from the scene. It was as if they had planned it, as though they were working together, perfectly coordinated in their sinister scheme. I kept thinking about what the police officer had said to me. His words echoed in my head like a warning: this is a common tactic. Two people working in tandem, one to grab the child and the other to act as the decoy. It was chilling to think that there were people out there who used this method to abduct children, to snatch them away without anyone noticing until it was too late. The first man's job was to grab the child and make a scene, drawing attention to himself, while the second man, the real abductor, slipped away with the child in a different car, using the distraction to disappear without a trace. It was a terrifying thought. And it was one that had never crossed my mind before. How many times had this happened before, unnoticed? How many parents had been in my shoes, unaware that a predator was lurking just a few feet away, waiting for the right moment to strike? The police officer's words haunted me, but they also served as a reminder: this was not just some isolated incident. It was part of something far bigger, something sinister that operated just beneath the surface of everyday life. I didn't know what the man's true intentions were. Maybe he really did think he was helping her. Maybe he saw her, alone and scared, and for a moment, thought he could take her somewhere safe. But I didn't believe that for a second. His movements, his approach, they were too deliberate. Too calculated. There was something else going on, something far darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been trying to lure her away for someone else. Maybe he had a buyer waiting. Maybe he had been told to do this, to grab a child and deliver her to someone who would take her far away. I didn't know. What I did know was that I couldn't afford to trust anyone again. I couldn't afford to relax. Not ever. I knew I had been lucky. Too lucky. I had acted fast, and that had made all the difference. But what about the other mothers, the other parents, who might not notice, who might not see the danger in front of them? What about the ones who would let their guard down, even for a second? The thought made my heart ache, and I realized just how important it was to stay vigilant. I can't help but think about how different things could have been. What if I hadn't seen him? What if my daughter had walked just a little too far ahead, out of my line of sight? What if I hadn't been paying attention? The world isn't as safe as we like to believe. It isn't the place we think it is when we let our guard down. That moment of distraction, that second when you think everything is fine, can be all it takes for your whole world to change. The faces of those two men, the brown-bearded man and the clean-shaven one, will never leave my mind. They are burned into my memory, their expressions, their hurried movements, their cold intentions. They are a reminder that not everyone in the world can be trusted. I don't know what their plan was, but I do know this: I won't forget them. And if I could offer any advice to anyone listening, it's this: always be aware, always watch your children, and never, ever assume that you're safe. Because that 1 second could change everything. As I sit here now, sharing this story, I can't help but feel grateful for the second chance I was given, but the fear, the uncertainty, it will always be there. I'll never stop watching. I'll never stop being vigilant. Not for a second. Because 1 second could mean everything. This next story, like the one before, happened in a completely different setting, but the sense of dread it left me with was just as terrifying. I was only 17 at the time, working at a clothing store in a rough part of London, a neighborhood that felt like a constant buzz of danger just beneath the surface. The store was always packed, especially when there was a sale, which was a near constant occurrence. I was used to the chaos, the loud chatter, the shuffle of shoes on the linoleum floor, and the occasional glance from shady individuals passing by. It had become part of my everyday routine, and I didn't think twice about it, that is, until this one particular day. It was a Friday afternoon, just a few hours before closing, when a man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, walked up to the counter. He seemed disheveled, his clothes unkempt, his eyes a bit too wide, and there was an odd tension in his movements. He told me he'd lost his phone and asked if he could use mine to make a quick call. His voice was shaking, and there was something off about his demeanor. I agreed, though it made me uneasy, handing over my phone, which he held with clammy hands. While he made the call, we exchanged a few words about the busy store and the weather, but there was a persistent undertone to his words. "You're my angel," he kept repeating, looking at me with a strange intensity. "You're my angel, you know that." At first, I thought it was a fluke, maybe just a weird expression. But it kept coming up, almost like a mantra. I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off as a harmless eccentricity. But then he led me over to one of the clothing racks, claiming his phone had been left there. I was a bit confused, but followed him anyway. There, nestled right in the middle of the rack, was the phone. It was almost perfectly placed, as if it had been put there with deliberate care. I froze for a second, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It just didn't feel right. He turned to me, his eyes dark, and said, "This is where it was." Just where I thought it'd be. The way he said it was far too calm for someone who had just lost something, especially with the panic he had shown earlier. But I didn't have time to dwell on it as he handed the phone back to me with an unsettling smile. "You really are my angel," he repeated, almost as if he was making sure I knew. I smiled nervously, not sure how to react. By the time my shift was over, the store had quieted down. I gathered my things, ready to head home, but as I stepped outside, I saw him again. The same man, sitting on a bench just outside the door, watching me intently. His gaze never left me as I locked the door behind me and made my way to the bus stop. The way his eyes followed me made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off, assuming he was just another weird guy hanging around, but as I got closer to the bus stop, I saw him stand up. My heart sank. He was coming toward me, quick, almost too quick, like he had been waiting for the exact moment. "Hey, wait up," he called out, his voice much smoother now, almost too friendly. "How about we go get a drink? I really owe you for being so kind, you know, letting me use your phone. It's the least I can do." I shook my head quickly, my mind racing. "No, I'm sorry, I really can't." I tried to back away, but that's when things took a turn. Before I knew it, he was grabbing my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. "Come on, just one drink," he insisted, his voice now rough and demanding. Panic surged through me. The urgency in his voice sent an electric shock of fear straight into my chest. I tried to pull my arm free, but he held on tighter, dragging me toward the alleyway behind the store. The night air felt suffocating as I struggled to break free, but he was relentless. The alley was dimly lit, the shadows seeming to stretch longer than usual, and I could see the outline of a black SUV parked at the far end, its engine humming softly, waiting. I didn't know what was happening, but my instincts screamed at me that I was in serious danger. My mind raced for any way out of this. I tried pulling away again, but his grip was ironclad. His face was inches from mine now, his breath smelling of alcohol, and his words were urgent. "You're coming with me, girl. You don't have a choice now." In that split second, I made a decision. I couldn't let him drag me further into the alley. I couldn't go to that car, I couldn't get in. I threw myself to the ground, dropping like a dead weight. My body slammed against the cold pavement, and I heard his breath catch in surprise. It was my chance. As soon as his grip loosened, I sprang to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I didn't look back. I just ran, as fast as my legs could carry me, all the way to the main road. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted, not caring if I made a scene, not caring who saw. The only thing that mattered was getting away. I didn't look behind me, but I could hear his footsteps chasing me, the sound of his shoes pounding on the pavement. But I kept running, the fear fueling my every step. The bus stop was just ahead. If I could make it there, I'd be safe. I reached the bus stop, my lungs burning, my legs like lead, but I didn't stop. I just kept running until I could barely hear his footsteps anymore. I didn't care if I looked insane, just so long as I was away from him. The bus arrived, and I got on without a second thought, never looking back. But here's the part that still haunts me, I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I was overreacting, that I had just misunderstood the situation. Or maybe I was too scared to say the words out loud, to admit what had almost happened. I couldn't bring myself to face it. It wasn't until a few years later, when I finally told my mom, that I realized how close I had come to being taken that night. The horror in her eyes when I recounted what had happened made me understand just how dangerous that situation had been. She said, "You were lucky. Don't ever ignore your gut again." And she was right. That was the moment when my perception of the world changed forever. I saw the dangers that lurked just outside the door. I learned not to trust my surroundings, not to trust strangers, not to assume that everything was okay, even when it seemed like it was. Because you never know when your world can turn upside down, when a seemingly innocent interaction can turn into a fight for your life. You never know who's watching or who has ulterior motives. That experience stayed with me, and I carried it into every new interaction I had after that. Always cautious. Always aware. Never letting my guard down. Because one moment of distraction, one moment of trusting the wrong person, could change everything. Now, let me take you to another terrifying encounter, one that stayed with me far longer than I would have ever imagined. I was 23 at the time, working at a restaurant in a city that I had grown comfortable with. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and it gave me a chance to meet all sorts of people. I was used to dealing with all kinds of personalities, but nothing could prepare me for what would unfold with one of my colleagues. His name was Nicholas, and at first, he seemed completely normal. He was a few years older than me, around 25, and we had brief conversations at work. He was friendly, or so I thought, just a guy working alongside me in the bustling restaurant, making small talk and sharing occasional jokes. But as the days went on, I started noticing odd things that made me uncomfortable, but I brushed them off at first. It started with small gestures. Nicholas would stand too close, sometimes accidentally brushing against me or bumping into me in a way that didn't feel like an accident. I tried to ignore it, thinking I was being paranoid. But then, it escalated. One day, I found a message from him on Instagram, a compliment, at first, about how I looked in my uniform. It was harmless enough, so I replied with a simple thanks, and hoped it would be over. But Nicholas didn't take the hint. The messages kept coming more frequent, more personal. At first, they seemed innocent enough: "I saw you laugh today, it made my day," or "You have the most incredible smile." But it didn't stop there. The messages became more invasive. "I noticed you were looking at me today. Was it because you like me? I've been thinking about you a lot lately, you're really special." I didn't know how to handle it. I blocked him on Instagram, hoping that would stop things, but it didn't. Nicholas found ways to contact me through other means. He sent me messages on Facebook, even resorting to calling the restaurant to ask when I'd be working. It was as if he had memorized my schedule. I tried to brush it off, hoping that it would pass. But things continued to get worse. It wasn't just online anymore. He started showing up in places I didn't expect, standing outside the restaurant when I was on my lunch break, or waiting for me in the parking lot after work. At first, I assumed he was just lingering around, but the more he did it, the more I realized something was terribly wrong. It was as if he knew exactly when I'd be there. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I went home feeling exhausted, hoping to finally relax. I had just gotten out of the shower when I glanced out the window of my apartment. My heart nearly stopped. There, parked right across the street, was Nicholas's car. I hadn't seen him leave the restaurant, and yet, there he was, sitting in his car, just staring at my building. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't understand how he had found me. I called my best friend immediately, telling her everything. She reassured me that I was probably just overthinking things, that it could be a coincidence, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, his presence became more intrusive. He started showing up at my house uninvited, pacing in front of my building or parking a block away, waiting for me to leave. He'd text me late at night, telling me he knew I was home because he'd seen my lights go off. I was terrified, trapped in my own apartment, unable to escape the shadow of this person who seemed to be everywhere I went. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to ignore him, tried to continue with my life, but it was impossible. His obsession grew worse. Nicholas started creating fake profiles on different social media platforms just to contact me. He would comment on my photos, accidentally liking old posts from months ago, anything to get my attention. One day, I went to the store for some groceries, and when I came back, my heart dropped. There, in the parking lot, was Nicholas's car again. I was sure it was him. I walked past it, trying to stay calm, but I felt his eyes on me. I could almost feel the weight of his gaze as I hurried to my apartment. The unease grew until it was unbearable. The next day, I came home from work, and I found something that sent a chill down my spine. There was a small package waiting for me outside my door. I didn't recognize the handwriting. My hands shook as I picked it up. Inside, I found a note. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but the words made my blood run cold. I'm always watching. I'll see you soon. That was it. That was the final straw. I couldn't live in fear any longer. I reported everything to the police: his harassment, the messages, the strange packages. I showed them the note and the dozens of disturbing messages he had sent me. But even then, I felt like I was still being watched. The police eventually traced his phone number, and with the evidence I had, they were able to make an arrest. Nicholas was charged with harassment and stalking, but the damage had already been done. I had quit my job to get away from him, hoping that would be enough to escape. But no matter where I went, his presence lingered like a dark cloud, following me in every shadow, in every unexpected glance. The feeling of being trapped in my own life, unable to escape the obsession of someone who would stop at nothing to get my attention, was more terrifying than I had ever imagined. The fear I felt during that time was suffocating. I had learned that some people will stop at nothing to get what they want, and some obsessions run so deep that nothing will deter them. But what scared me most wasn't just Nicholas's relentless pursuit, it was how I felt afterward. It's the fear that no matter how far you run, no matter how many steps you take to protect yourself, you're never truly free from the shadow of someone who wants to possess you. This experience left me with a deep sense of unease, a constant reminder that not all people are who they seem. What Nicholas did to me wasn't just about control, it was about terrorizing me, about making me feel as though my life no longer belonged to me. It's a chilling reminder that we must always be vigilant, especially when dealing with strangers or even people we think we can trust. I learned a valuable lesson that day: never assume you're safe, not even in your own home, and never let your guard down. Some people will go to unimaginable lengths to cross boundaries and make you their obsession. But sometimes, the worst part is knowing that it could happen to anyone. It wasn't just about Nicholas. It was about the terrifying reality that the world is full of people who will stop at nothing to get what they want, and that can be the scariest part of all. If there's one thing I've learned from all of these experiences, it's that the world is not always as safe as it seems. These moments of terror, whether it's a close call at a park, an unsettling encounter at work, or the creeping feeling of being stalked, remind us all to never let our guard down. Trust your instincts, and always be aware of your surroundings. Because that 1 second of distraction could be all it takes for your life to change forever. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember that you never know what lurks around the corner. Good night, and thank you for listening.